For most animals, life is short. A mouse may live only a few years. Many wild mammals never reach old age at all. Even our closest living relatives, chimpanzees, usually do not experience anything quite like the long human journey from childhood to old age. But humans are different. We grow slowly. We remain dependent on adults for years. We spend an unusually long time learning before we can fully survive on our own. And then, after reaching adulthood, many of us remain alive for decades. From an evolutionary point of view, this is strange. Keeping a body alive is expensive. Every day, cells must be repaired, damaged proteins must be replaced, DNA must be maintained, wounds must heal. The immune system must continue defending the body against infection. The heart must beat billions of times. The brain must preserve enormous networks of connections while constantly adapting to new information. None of this happens for free. Energy spent maintaining an old body is energy that cannot be spent somewhere else. And evolution does not simply favor organisms that live as long as possible. It favors traits that help genes survive into future generations. So, why did natural selection produce an animal capable of surviving for 70, 80, or sometimes more than 100 years? To understand the answer, we have to forget modern medicine for a moment. Hospitals, antibiotics, vaccines, clean drinking water, and modern sanitation have dramatically increased the number of people who survive into old age. But they did not create the human capacity for long life. That capacity is much older. Even populations living without modern medicine can contain people who survive well beyond the years of reproduction. Human longevity is therefore not simply a recent technological accident. It is part of the unusual life history our species inherited from its ancestors, and one of the most remarkable clues comes from women. Human females generally stop reproducing decades before the maximum human lifespan. This creates an evolutionary puzzle. If reproduction has ended, why should natural selection continue favoring a body capable of surviving for many more years? For most of the history of evolutionary biology, the obvious assumption was that the force of natural selection should weaken strongly after reproduction. But human families changed that equation. An older person does not need to produce another child to influence how many descendants survive. She can help feed grandchildren. She can protect them. She can teach younger members of the group where food can be found, which plants are dangerous, how seasons change, where water remains during drought, and how previous crises were survived. Knowledge itself can become a form of biological value, and this may have transformed the meaning of old age. Imagine a small group of human ancestors living in a difficult and changing environment. Children are expensive. Human children cannot simply walk away shortly after birth and begin feeding themselves. Their brains are still developing. They must learn complex skills. They depend on adults for food and protection for years. A mother caring for several dependent children faces a serious problem. She has limited time and energy. But if another experienced adult helps provide food, care, and protection, the entire reproductive strategy changes. A child can remain dependent longer. A mother can potentially have another baby sooner. More children can survive, and an older adult, even one who is no longer reproducing, can still increase the survival of her own genes by helping close relatives. This idea became known as the grandmother hypothesis. It does not claim that grandmothers alone explain every aspect of human longevity. Scientists continue to debate the importance of several interacting forces, including food sharing, cooperative childcare, hunting, social relationships, knowledge, male survival, and changes in mortality. But the central idea is powerful. At some point in human evolution, surviving longer may have become useful not only because an individual could continue reproducing, but because older individuals could help other members of their family reproduce successfully. old age was no longer biologically useless, it could become an advantage. And once survival into later life began increasing the success of descendants, natural selection had a reason to preserve bodies for longer, not forever, but much longer than before. This was the beginning of one of the strangest transformations in human evolution. Our ancestors were not simply evolving bigger brains or better tools. They were evolving more time. But grandmothers are only part of the story. Human longevity appears to be tied to something even broader: the way our species raises children. Compared with most mammals, human childhood is unusually long and unusually expensive. A human child needs food, protection, teaching, and social support for many years before becoming fully independent. That creates a problem. One mother cannot easily provide everything alone. Across human societies, children are often supported not only by mothers, but also by fathers, grandparents, siblings, and other members of the social group. Researchers describe this broader pattern in different ways, including alloparental care, cooperative care, and biocultural reproduction. The terminology is debated, but the basic observation is not. Humans commonly distribute the cost of raising children across multiple people. This may have changed the evolutionary value of surviving into older adulthood. An older person could still contribute. They could gather food. They could watch children. They could teach. They could maintain alliances. They could remember where resources had been found during previous droughts, migrations, or seasonal shortages. And crucially, they could help younger relatives raise children who carried some of the same genes. Evolutionary biologists call this inclusive fitness. An organism can increase the representation of its genes in future generations, not only by producing offspring directly, but also by helping close relatives survive and reproduce. For humans, that principle may have made older individuals particularly valuable. Evidence from hunter-gatherer populations helped inspire this idea. Among the Hadza of Tanzania, researchers observed that young children were often unable to obtain certain difficult foods efficiently on their own. Older women, however, could continue gathering substantial amounts of food, and their efforts could contribute to the nutrition of grandchildren. These observations became an important foundation of the grandmother hypothesis. The evolutionary consequence could be enormous. Suppose a female nearing the end of her fertility survives several additional years. If those years allow her daughter to raise more surviving children, then genes associated with greater adult survival may still receive a reproductive advantage. In other words, natural selection does not necessarily stop mattering the moment direct reproduction ends. Family relationships can extend its effects into later life. Computer models have shown that even relatively modest grandmother assistance can, under certain assumptions, shift an evolving population from an ape-like adult lifespan toward a substantially longer human-like lifespan. These models do not prove that this is exactly what happened in our ancestry, but they demonstrate that the mechanism is evolutionarily plausible, and longevity may have produced another important consequence. More years of life meant more years available for learning. Humans survive in environments that demand extraordinary amounts of information. Which plants can be eaten? Which ones are poisonous? When will animals migrate? Where can water be found after months without rain? How do you manufacture a difficult tool? How do you treat an injury? Who can be trusted? Who owes whom a favor? What happened the last time the river flooded? For an animal that depends heavily on learned behavior, experience can become extremely valuable. An older individual has something a younger individual cannot instantly acquire: time. Decades of accumulated observation can turn one person into a living archive of environmental and social information. This does not mean that ancient societies were automatically ruled by the oldest individuals, or that every elderly person provided equal benefits, human social organization has always been highly variable. But a species increasingly dependent on learning, cooperation, and shared knowledge created more opportunities for older individuals to remain useful, and this produced a remarkable feedback. Longer life allowed more knowledge to accumulate. More knowledge increased the potential value of older individuals. Greater value of older individuals could favor survival later in life. At the same time, longer lifespans allowed development itself to slow down. Humans could spend more years growing and learning before adulthood. Our long childhood and our long lifespan, therefore, may not be separate evolutionary mysteries. They may be parts of the same unusual strategy. Instead of growing quickly, reproducing quickly, and dying quickly, humans increasingly invested in something different: slow development, large amounts of learning, intensive care of children, cooperation across generations, and a body capable of remaining alive long enough for all of that investment to matter. Recent work on the grandmother hypothesis argues that this extension of lifespan may even be connected with several other distinctive human traits, including prolonged development and the evolution of our unusually large brain. But there is still a deeper question. Even if natural selection favored longer life, why did it not simply make humans biologically immortal? Why do our bodies eventually begin to fail? The answer lies in one of evolution's most important compromises. Why, then, do humans age at all? If living longer can help children, grandchildren, and entire communities survive, why did evolution not continue improving the human body until aging disappeared completely? The answer is that evolution does not design perfect organisms. It works through compromises. Every body has a limited amount of energy. That energy must be divided between growth, reproduction, immune defense, movement, brain function, repair, and countless other biological processes. Maintaining a body indefinitely would require enormous investment. Natural selection, therefore, tends to favor enough maintenance to keep an organism alive and reproductively successful under the conditions in which it evolved, not perfect maintenance forever. This idea is central to what biologists call the disposable soma theory. The word soma simply means the body, excluding the reproductive cells. According to this theory, organisms must balance two competing demands. They can invest energy in producing offspring, or they can invest that energy in repairing and maintaining their own bodies. Too little maintenance, and the organism dies before reproducing. Too much maintenance, and resources may be wasted on keeping one individual alive when those resources could have produced more descendants. Evolution favors a balance. Humans appear to have evolved a balance that includes unusually high investment in long-term maintenance, but even our bodies are not maintained perfectly. Small forms of damage accumulate, proteins can become altered, DNA can be damaged, cells can lose some of their ability to function normally, mitochondria can become less efficient, stem cells can decline. The immune system can change. Some cells stop dividing and enter a state known as cellular senescence. The body has systems for correcting many of these problems. But those systems are not flawless, and they were never selected to preserve the body forever. Another important idea comes from evolutionary geneticist Peter Medawar. He argued that natural selection becomes weaker at older ages. Imagine a harmful genetic mutation that causes death at the age of 5. It would be strongly selected against, because its carriers would usually die before having children. Now imagine another mutation that causes serious problems only at the age of 80. For most of human evolutionary history, many people would already have reproduced long before that mutation caused harm. Natural selection would therefore be much less effective at removing it. This is known as the mutation accumulation theory of aging. Over many generations, harmful effects that appear late in life can remain in a population because evolution has relatively little power to eliminate them. Then there is another possibility. Some genes may actually be beneficial early in life but harmful later, a biological mechanism that increases growth, fertility, or physical performance during youth could improve reproductive success. But decades later, the same mechanism might increase the risk of disease or tissue damage. Evolution may still favor it because the early advantage occurs when natural selection is strongest. This idea is called antagonistic pleiotropy. One gene or one biological pathway can have different effects at different stages of life, useful when young, costly when old. Together, these ideas explain something important. Aging does not necessarily exist because evolution programmed us to die. Instead, aging can emerge because natural selection prioritizes survival and reproduction earlier in life, while becoming progressively less effective at eliminating problems that appear much later. Human longevity, therefore, represents a compromise. Our ancestors evolved stronger body maintenance than many other animals because surviving for decades could provide important benefits. But that maintenance was never perfect. Evolution extended life, it did not eliminate aging. And this distinction matters. The human body is not like a machine with a single part that suddenly wears out. Aging involves many interacting systems slowly changing over time. Some damage is repaired, some is tolerated, some accumulates. And some biological processes that once helped us may eventually begin working against us. This is why scientists do not describe aging as one simple mechanism. It is the result of many processes operating at different levels, from DNA and proteins to cells, organs, and the immune system. Yet compared with many other mammals, humans are remarkably good at keeping those systems functioning for a long time. A mouse can reach old age in only a few years. A human body can continue maintaining a functioning heart, brain, and immune system for many decades. So something important changed during our evolution. Natural selection began investing more heavily in keeping the human body alive. But that raises another question. When did this change happen? Were our earliest ancestors already long-lived, or did long human life emerge gradually as our brains, families, and cultures became more complex? The fossil record cannot tell us exactly how long an individual human ancestor lived. Bones do not come with birthdays, and estimating age at death becomes increasingly difficult once an individual reaches adulthood. But fossils can still reveal something important. They can show us whether more individuals were surviving into relatively old age. Researchers have used several clues to estimate the ages of prehistoric adults, including changes in bones and patterns of tooth wear. The results suggest that human longevity did not appear all at once. It increased gradually. Early members of our evolutionary lineage seem to have had relatively few individuals who survived long enough to be considered old adults. Later members of the genus Homo show signs of increasing adult survival, and among Neanderthals and early modern humans, the proportion of older adults appears to have risen further. One influential study examined fossil teeth from several stages of human evolution. Instead of trying to determine the exact age of every individual, researchers compared younger adults with individuals whose teeth showed much heavier wear. The oldest group represented people who had survived to roughly twice the age at which their third molars normally appeared. In evolutionary terms, these were potential grandparents. The pattern was striking. Among early human ancestors, older adults were relatively rare. Their numbers increased later. And during the Upper Paleolithic, among early modern humans, the ratio of older adults to younger adults increased dramatically. For the first time in our evolutionary history, large numbers of people may have been living long enough for several adult generations to coexist. That would have changed human society. Imagine a population in which most adults die relatively young. Knowledge disappears quickly. A skilled hunter dies, and years of experience disappear with him. A woman who understands seasonal plant resources dies, and younger people must rediscover part of that knowledge themselves. But now imagine a population with many older adults. Knowledge can survive for decades. Young adults can learn from people who remember events that happened before they were born. Children can interact not only with parents, but with grandparents. Techniques can be demonstrated repeatedly. Stories can preserve information about distant places and dangerous events. Traditions can become more stable. This does not mean that older people suddenly created human culture. Culture existed much earlier, nor can fossils prove that longevity directly caused later cultural changes. The archaeological record is too incomplete for such a simple conclusion. But longer adult lives would have created conditions in which cultural information could accumulate more effectively. And around the same broad period, when older adults became more common, the archaeological record of Homo sapiens begins to show increasingly complex and diverse forms of behavior. Tools became more specialized. Long-distance exchange networks expanded. Personal ornaments became more common. Symbolic objects appeared in greater numbers. Human groups were becoming increasingly dependent on information transmitted from one generation to another. Long life could make that system more powerful. An individual who survived for 50 or 60 years did not simply consume resources for longer. That person might carry decades of experience. And in environments where climate could change dramatically across a lifetime, experience could become extraordinarily valuable. An older person might remember a severe drought from decades earlier. They might know where water survived. They might remember which valley still contained animals when other regions failed. They might recognize signs of environmental change that younger people had never encountered. This idea has led some researchers to describe older humans as repositories of ecological knowledge. The value of such knowledge is difficult to measure in prehistoric populations. We cannot observe a Paleolithic grandmother teaching her grandchildren. We cannot interview an elderly hunter who lived 40,000 years ago, so we must be careful. The fossil record tells us that older adults became more common. Archaeology tells us that human cultural behavior became increasingly complex. Evolutionary theory suggests several ways those developments could reinforce one another. But the exact relationship remains a scientific question rather than a settled historical fact. There is another important point. Human longevity may have begun increasing much earlier than the Upper Paleolithic. Some researchers argue that important changes were already underway with Homo erectus, nearly 2 million years ago. Homo erectus had a body adapted for efficient long-distance movement. It occupied larger territories. It relied on increasingly complex strategies for obtaining food. And its life history may already have been shifting towards slower development and longer adulthood. The evidence is incomplete, and scientists continue to debate exactly when the modern human pattern emerged. But the broad direction is clear. Over the course of human evolution, surviving into later adulthood became increasingly common. And once several generations regularly lived together, something new became possible. A society no longer depended only on what its youngest adults could discover for themselves, it could remember. Human beings were beginning to accumulate knowledge across lifetimes, and that may have made a long life more valuable than ever before. Long life, however, depends on more than family and culture. It also depends on food. Brains are expensive organs. Human children grow slowly. Human adults remain active for decades, and our bodies devote enormous amounts of energy to maintaining the brain, muscles, immune system, and internal organs. To support such a life history, our ancestors needed reliable access to high-quality calories. This is one reason diet became so important in human evolution. Early humans did not survive on a single perfect food. They were flexible omnivores. Depending on place and season, they could eat fruits, roots, tubers, nuts, seeds, meat, marrow, shellfish, and many other foods. That flexibility mattered because a long life requires surviving not only good years, but bad ones. Droughts happen, animal populations move, plants fail, seasons change. A species that can switch between food sources has a better chance of surviving environmental instability. But another transformation may have been even more important: food processing. Before eating, humans increasingly changed food. They cut it, pounded it, crushed it, dried it, and eventually they cooked it. Cooking changes the physical and chemical structure of food. It softens many plant tissues. It denatures proteins. It can increase the amount of energy that the digestive system obtains from certain foods, and it reduces the amount of chewing required. For humans, this may have been a major advantage. Compared with other great apes, our digestive system is adapted to a relatively energy-dense diet. Our teeth and jaws are also smaller than we would expect for an ape of our body size. Exactly when habitual cooking became common is still debated. Archaeologists have found evidence of controlled fire going back hundreds of thousands of years, and there are claims for even earlier fire use. But proving that a particular ancient fire was used specifically for cooking is difficult. So scientists cannot point to one exact moment and say, this is when cooking began. Still, once cooking became habitual, its consequences could have been enormous. Food became easier to chew. Some nutrients became easier to digest. More calories could be obtained in less time. That matters because time itself is an evolutionary resource. A chimpanzee can spend a large part of the day chewing and processing raw food. Humans spend far less time doing this. Food preparation moves some of the work outside the body. Instead of relying entirely on teeth, jaws, and intestines, humans use tools and heat to process food before swallowing it. In a sense, part of digestion happens before the meal even enters the mouth. This may have allowed more energy to become available for other biological demands, including the brain. But diet and longevity are connected in another way. Food sharing. Humans frequently obtain foods that are difficult for children to acquire themselves. Large animals are one obvious example. A successful hunt may produce far more meat than one hunter can eat. The food can be shared with children, relatives, and other members of the group. Plant foods can also be shared. An experienced adult may gather or process foods that younger individuals cannot efficiently obtain. This creates an important difference between humans and many other mammals. Individuals do not always survive only on the food they personally acquire. They can survive through networks of cooperation. A child can receive food from adults. An injured person can be supported temporarily. A pregnant or nursing woman can receive help. An older person whose physical abilities have declined may still receive food from others. This kind of sharing can reduce the immediate penalty of being temporarily weak, and that may help make long life possible. In a species where every individual must obtain every calorie alone, declining physical performance can quickly become fatal. But in a cooperative species, survival can continue even when one person's ability changes. That does not mean prehistoric humans cared for every weak or elderly individual. The archaeological record cannot support such a simple claim. But there is evidence that some prehistoric people survived serious injuries, illnesses, and disabilities for substantial periods of time. In certain cases, survival would probably have required assistance from others. This tells us something important. Human survival was becoming increasingly social. Our bodies evolved inside networks of dependence. Children depended on adults. Adults depended on cooperation. Older people could contribute knowledge and labor, and people who temporarily could not provide for themselves might still survive because others helped them. This social safety net was nothing like a modern welfare system. It was small, personal, and based on relationships, but biologically, it may have had profound consequences. It could reduce mortality. It could allow slower development. It could support larger brains. And it could make survival into old age more realistic. Human longevity, then, may not come from one extraordinary gene. It may come from an entire way of life, better food, food processing, sharing, cooperation, learning, and generations helping one another survive. But even with all these advantages, ancient humans still lived in a dangerous world. Infections, injuries, childbirth, hunger, and violence killed many people young. So how could a species with such high mortality still evolve the capacity to live for so many decades? The answer requires separating two very different ideas. Life expectancy and lifespan are not the same thing. For a long time, people have repeated a misleading idea about the past. They say that ancient humans usually died at 30. Sometimes the number is even lower, 25, 28, 32. And technically, those numbers can appear in historical estimates, but they do not mean what many people think they mean. They do not mean that most adults suddenly became old and died at the age of 30. They usually refer to life expectancy at birth, and life expectancy at birth is heavily influenced by deaths during infancy and childhood. Imagine a small population. Some children die before their first birthday. Others die at 5 or 10. A few adults die in accidents or childbirth. But several people survive into their 50s, 60s, or even beyond. When all of those ages are averaged together, the result can be surprisingly low. The average might be 30 years, yet a 30-year-old adult in that population could still have many years ahead. This distinction is essential. Max Myson lifespan describes how long members of a species are biologically capable of living. Life expectancy describes the average number of years a person can expect to live under a particular set of mortality conditions. They are not the same thing. For much of human history, life expectancy at birth was low, mainly because the first years of life were extremely dangerous. Infectious disease was a major threat. Clean water was not guaranteed. Food shortages could weaken entire communities. Wounds could become infected. Childbirth could be deadly. And many diseases that are now preventable or treatable could kill within days. Children were especially vulnerable. So, when large numbers of children died young, the average age at death fell dramatically. But people who survived childhood had already passed through one of the most dangerous periods of life. Their remaining life expectancy could be much longer. This is why historical populations contained people who reached ages that would not seem extraordinary today. People lived into their 50s, their 60s, sometimes their 70s and beyond. Old age was less common than it is in many modern societies, but it was not unknown. And this tells us something very important about human biology. Modern medicine did not suddenly invent the ability of the human body to survive for many chirurgies. It changed the probability that people would actually reach those decades. That is a very different thing. The biological potential was already there. What changed was the environment around the body. Think about what normally kills a young human being. A bacterial infection, a contaminated water supply, a severe injury, a dangerous birth, a childhood disease. None of these necessarily tells us anything about how long the human body could have survived if the immediate threat had been removed. For thousands of years, people often died before aging itself became their main problem. Modern public health changed that pattern. Clean drinking water reduced exposure to dangerous pathogens. Sewage systems separated human waste from water supplies. Vaccination prevented infections that had once killed enormous numbers of children. Antibiotics made many bacterial infections treatable. Safer childbirth reduced maternal deaths. Better nutrition helped children survive periods that had previously been extremely dangerous. And medicine increasingly became capable of keeping people alive after injuries and diseases that once would have been fatal. As those threats declined, more humans began reaching ages that our species had already been biologically capable of reaching. This is one reason the increase in average life expectancy during the modern era was so dramatic. The change was not initially caused by humans suddenly aging more slowly. A large part of the improvement came from preventing premature death, especially early in life. Later, medicine also became better at extending life in adulthood. High blood pressure could be treated. Heart disease could be managed. Some cancers could be detected earlier. Surgery became safer. Intensive care could keep people alive through severe illness. As mortality shifted toward older ages, the shape of human life changed. More children had living grandparents. More families contained several generations at the same time. Retirement became a normal stage of life in many societies, and millions of people began living decades beyond the age at which their ancestors had completed reproduction. But even here, there is another misconception. Modern life expectancy has increased enormously. Maximum verified human lifespan has not increased in the same way. The difference matters. If medicine eliminated every early death tomorrow, humans would not automatically begin living for 200 years. Eventually, aging itself becomes the dominant problem. The body accumulates molecular and cellular changes. The risk of cancer rises. Blood vessels change. Organs lose some functional reserve. Immune responses become less effective. The probability of several diseases increases at the same time. Medicine has become remarkably good at treating individual diseases, but aging is not one disease. It affects nearly every system in the body. This creates a strange situation. We have become very good at helping humans reach old age, but we are still learning how to change the biology of old age itself. And that is why the next stage of the story is so different from everything that came before. For most of human history, the central challenge was surviving long enough to become old. Now, in many parts of the world, millions of people routinely reach old age. The new question is no longer simply how to stay alive. It is how long the human body can remain healthy once aging has become the main limit. If modern medicine has helped more people reach old age, the next question becomes unavoidable. How long can a human being actually live? The oldest verified human lifespan remains just over 120 years. That number is extraordinary, but it also reveals something important. Human life expectancy has risen dramatically over the last 2 centuries, yet the outer edge of human lifespan has moved far less. This suggests that preventing early death and slowing biological aging are not the same problem. A person can survive infections, avoid accidents, receive excellent medical care, and still encounter the deeper limits created by aging itself. Scientists sometimes describe aging through a group of biological processes known as the hallmarks of aging. These include damage to DNA, changes in the way genes are regulated, problems with proteins, mitochondrial dysfunction, cellular senescence, stem cell exhaustion, and alterations in communication between cells. No single one of these processes explains aging completely. They interact. A change in one system can accelerate damage in another. Over time, the body's ability to maintain balance becomes weaker. This is why aging is so difficult to treat. If aging were caused by one defective molecule, medicine could target that molecule. But aging is a network problem. It involves nearly every tissue in the body. Researchers are now asking whether some of these processes can be slowed, reversed, or manipulated. In laboratory animals, several interventions have extended lifespan. One of the oldest and most reproducible is calorie restriction. In many species, reducing calorie intake without causing malnutrition can extend lifespan and delay some age-related diseases. The effect is not identical in every animal, and translating it directly to humans is complicated, but the discovery showed that aging is not completely fixed. Biological pathways can influence how quickly an organism deteriorates. Researchers have also studied genes involved in nutrient sensing, metabolism, cellular repair, and stress responses. Pathways involving insulin signaling, mTOR, AMPK, and sirtuins have become major areas of aging research. These pathways help cells decide whether energy should be used for growth, reproduction, repair, or survival. Changing that balance can sometimes affect lifespan. Another major target is cellular senescence. Senescent cells are cells that have stopped dividing but have not died. They can accumulate with age and release signals that affect nearby tissues. In animal experiments, removing some senescent cells has improved certain measures of health and, in some cases, extended healthy lifespan. Drugs designed to remove these cells are called senolytics. Human trials are still early. At this point, there is no approved treatment that has been proven to stop human aging. Another area of research involves epigenetic changes. As cells age, patterns that control gene activity can become disrupted. Scientists have experimented with partially resetting some of these patterns in animals. The goal is not to turn old cells completely back into embryonic cells. That would be dangerous. The goal is to restore more youthful patterns of gene regulation without destroying the cell's identity. The results in laboratory research have attracted enormous attention, but translating them into safe human treatments remains a major challenge. There are also attempts to influence aging through existing drugs. Metformin, widely used to treat type 2 diabetes, has been studied because people taking it sometimes show interesting patterns in age-related disease. Rapamycin, a drug that affects the mTOR pathway, can extend lifespan in several animal species. But both drugs also have risks. Neither should be treated as a proven anti-aging medicine for healthy people. This distinction is essential. A treatment that extends the life of a mouse is not automatically a treatment that extends the life of a human. Mice live for only a few years. Human aging unfolds across many decades. A drug can affect one species differently from another. It can also produce side effects that become important only after long-term use. This is why human longevity research moves slowly. To prove that a treatment actually extends human lifespan could require decades. Researchers therefore often study health span instead. Health span means the portion of life spent in relatively good health. For many scientists, this may be the more important goal. Living 120 years would not be very attractive if the final 40 years were dominated by severe disease and disability. The real objective is to delay the period in which multiple age-related diseases appear. If heart disease, dementia, cancer, and frailty could all be postponed, then people might live longer simply because they remain healthier for longer. This idea is sometimes called compression of morbidity. Instead of extending the period of sickness at the end of life, the goal is to push serious disease closer to the end. Whether humans will eventually be able to extend maximum lifespan far beyond its current limits remains unknown. Some scientists believe there may be hard biological constraints. Others argue that those limits could change if the fundamental mechanisms of aging can be altered. At present, there is no scientific consensus that humans will soon live to 150, 200, or more. Those numbers remain speculation. What is clear is that aging is no longer being studied only as an unavoidable background process. It has become an active target of biology. For the first time, researchers are trying to understand not only why we age, but whether the rate of aging itself can be changed. And that brings us back to the original question. Why do humans live so long? Because our evolution created a species that benefited from time to learn, time to cooperate, time to raise children, time to help grandchildren, time to accumulate knowledge, and eventually, time to build a civilization capable of studying aging itself. But there is still one final question. If long life became so valuable to our species, what exactly are all those extra decades for? Perhaps the most unusual thing about human longevity is that so many of our later years can exist after the most intense period of reproduction has already passed. From a purely mechanical point of view, those years might seem unnecessary, but human life has never been purely mechanical. Our species survives through information, through memory, through cooperation, through relationships that continue long after children are born. An older human can carry knowledge accumulated across decades, not abstract knowledge stored in a book, practical knowledge, where water can still be found after a dry season, which plants are safe, how to recognize approaching weather, how to make a difficult tool, how to calm a frightened child, how to resolve a conflict before it becomes dangerous, how to recognize a disease that has appeared before, and how to survive events that younger members of the group have never experienced. This kind of knowledge becomes especially valuable in environments that change unpredictably. A younger person may understand what is normal. An older person may remember what happened when normal conditions failed. That difference can matter. And over many generations, long life may have made human culture more stable. Skills did not need to be rediscovered from the beginning each time. Knowledge could move from older people to younger ones, then from those younger people to the next generation. Eventually, information could accumulate faster than genetic evolution alone could ever manage. This is one of the defining features of our species. Humans adapt not only through changes in genes. We adapt through culture, and culture becomes more powerful when knowledge survives across generations. In this sense, longevity may have helped create something larger than individual survival. It may have helped create continuity. A human group could preserve experience beyond the lifespan of a single childhood. And as language became more complex, this effect became even stronger. A person no longer had to experience an event directly to learn from it. Someone else could describe it, work on about it, explain what happened. Stories could carry informations across years. Traditions could carry it across generations. And eventually, writing could preserve it far beyond the life of any individual. But none of this means that evolution gave humans long lives because it was planning for civilization. Evolution has no plan. Natural selection cannot see the future. It acts only through differences in survival and reproduction across generations. The long human lifespan appears to have emerged from many pressures acting together: slow development, large brains, long childhood, cooperative care, food sharing, knowledge, social bonds, and the usefulness of older adults. No single explanation is enough on its own. Even the grandmother hypothesis, one of the best-known explanations, remains part of a broader scientific debate. Other researchers emphasize hunting, paternal investment, pair bonding, reduced adult mortality, cooperative breeding, cultural transmission, and the benefits of maintaining experienced adults inside social groups. These ideas are not necessarily mutually exclusive. Several of them may have operated at the same time. And this is probably why the evolution of human longevity is so difficult to reduce to one simple cause. We are not long-lived because one mutation suddenly appeared. We are long-lived because the entire human life cycle changed. We became a slow species, A human baby develops slowly. A human child learns for years. A human adolescent spends a long time approaching full adulthood. And even after reproduction begins, learning continues. Our brains continue changing. Our social networks change. Our roles change. Our knowledge grows. In many species, adulthood is largely about reproducing as quickly as possible before death. Human adulthood became something longer and more complicated. It became a period of production, care, teaching, cooperation, and memory, and our biology followed that strategy. But there is an important limit to this story. Evolution favored long life only when long life produced enough benefit. It did not favor immortality. Eventually, the cost of maintaining the body rises, damage accumulates, repair becomes less efficient, cancer risk increases, organs lose reserve, and the strength of natural selection becomes weaker at ages that few ancestral individuals reached. This is why human longevity has two faces. We are extraordinarily long-lived for a primate of our size and reproductive pattern. But we are still mortal. Our bodies were built to last much longer than those of many mammals. They were not built to last forever. Modern medicine has now pushed this system further than evolution ever experienced. Millions of people routinely survive into their 70s and 80s. Many reach their 90s. A smaller number survive beyond 100. And this creates a world that our ancestors rarely encountered, a world filled with old people, a world in which 4 generations of one family can sometimes be alive at the same time, a world in which knowledge can remain embodied in individuals for almost a century. And now, for the first time, humans are trying to extend that period deliberately. We are studying the molecular mechanisms of aging. We are testing drugs. We are studying diet, metabolism, senescent cells, gene regulation, and tissue repair. We are asking whether the limits produced by evolution can themselves be modified. We do not yet know how far this can go. Claims that humans will soon routinely live for 150 or 200 years are not established scientific facts. No treatment has yet been proven to produce anything close to that result. But the question itself is remarkable. For almost all of our evolutionary history, the challenge was simply to survive. Now, we are beginning to ask whether survival can be redesigned. And perhaps that is the most human part of this entire story. Evolution gave us more time. More time created more learning created culture. Culture created science. And science has now turned back toward the process that made all of this possible. Human longevity began as an evolutionary advantage. It became a social advantage, then a cultural one. And today it has become one of biology's greatest questions. Why do humans live so long? Because for our species, survival was never only about staying alive. It was about what could be passed on while we were still here.